Hello Mousers, I'm so glad we dealt with what illegal actually means on Friday because it's going to be important today when we deal with our final story. It's been an interesting weekend for legal news, so we've got a lot to cover today. So let's get started. First up, we have the death of the so-called Lockerbie bomber, Abdelbaset al-Megrahi, and yes, I did have to look that up and how to pronounce it. He's a former Libyan intelligence officer who was extradited in 1999 to face trial in a special court in the Netherlands which presided over Scots law and found him guilty of bombing Pan Am Flight 103 in December 1988. The evidence put forward during the trial has always been under dispute, and many, including members of the families of some of the victims and current Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond, have always claimed that al-Megrahi was either innocent or not solely responsible. Now that he's dead, there are renewed cries for a fresh look at the case. But as it stands, there's a problem in reporting al-Megrahi's trial for someone like myself who lives in the UK. There is a lot of information, almost all of it in fact, which is covered by the Official Secrets Act, which means even if I was a good enough investigative journalist to actually be able to uncover all of the information we need within the morning that I've got to put this show together, I still wouldn't be able to actually talk to you about it because the Official Secrets Act prohibits it. However, there is the advantage that the internet is connected to Switzerland, where much of the information required to demonstrate that al-Megrahi was either innocent or working on the orders of Iran rather than Libya is freely available. I'm not going to say go and look for it because that would be attempted to get around the Official Secrets Act, and I rather enjoy not being in jail. But as with all good sex tapes, if you really want to find it, the internet is your friend. As it stands, I don't believe that al-Megrahi was involved in the bombing, and I believe the evidence was set up for political purposes. The bombing was almost certainly an Iranian response to US actions in Iran in the late 1980s. Next up, we have the political shitstorm of the century about to take centre stage. What problem is this, you might ask? Well, it's only the potential end of the European Union, and if you think that's not a possibility, you've been reading different reports on the European debt crisis than I have. Over the weekend, a buttload of European leaders met with President Obama, who seems to be involved in just about everything the UK is involved in, because Britain likes to keep its options open, to discuss the Greek debt problem. Last week, Greek politicians failed to put a government together because a large portion of the voters elected people who don't want any more austerity measures designed to slash Greece's annual budget deficit in order to get the economy back on track. The politicians who favoured the austerity measures refused to form a government with those who opposed it, and as a result, Greece has to have another election. Now, the rest of Europe is basically telling the Greek people that if they fail to elect a government that will accept a load of rather severe measures to cut the deficit, Greece will be forced to leave the single European currency, at which point their economy may well collapse. That's not the end of it, however, as current economic forecasts are predicting a 75% chance that Greece will have to leave the euro anyway due to their severe level of debt and the fact that their economy is tanking as we speak. In fact, the same forecast is predicting a chance of greater than 90% that Greece will default on its entire sovereign debt within 2 years, at which point we'll have another Iceland problem on our hands. So why is this the start of the end of the European Union? Well, it's unfortunately due to the ever closer union that European politicians have been attempting to build since the 1960s. The Greek economy is closely tied through Greek, European and international banks to the economies of Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany and France. Out of all those economies, only Germany's is truly stable right now, and the southern European states are all having budget problems of their own. If the Greek economy collapses like Iceland's did, there will be a run on the banks like there were in the 16 Spanish banks last week. Greece imports most of its food and medicines, and costs of those will soar. Their currency will become worthless without outside help. This will have a knock-on effect on the euro in general, and since so many European nations have made substantial loans to Greece, other European banks will face severe cash flow problems, and potentially even collapse unless the European Central Bank can bail them out, but its funds are not infinite. At some point the ECB will run out of money, especially if Spain, Portugal and Italy also go under. They aren't as likely, but they are close. So right now we have to watch what happens in Greece with interest because it could be the start of a major problem in Europe, and the problem can only spread from here. How far it spreads depends a lot on whether our politicians can get along with our economists long enough to sort out the cash flow problem, and all I can say right now is that I'm glad Britain stayed out of the euro because our economy isn't exactly great right now. Okay, let's move on to our final story. A bunch of auctioneers in America have sold a dinosaur that apparently doesn't belong to them. This dinosaur, known currently as Tarbosaurus bataar, but if paleontologists decide that it's actually related to the T-Rex, may soon be renamed Tyrannosaurus bataar, is one of a small number of fossils reputedly existing only in Mongolia. So far, so lacking in a problem, wouldn't you say? Well, yes, until you realise that Mongolia does not allow the export of its fossils, and has not done so for over 50 years. Not only that, but the Mongolian government is claiming that there are no certificates of provenance for this Tarbosaurus fossil, which can only mean the fossil was excavated fairly recently. So how did it end up in America? The Mongolians are claiming that it was smuggled out of their country along with several other fossils that were auctioned at the same time. And furthermore, the auction's website refers to the Gobi Desert and Nemegit Formation in reference to these fossils. These are geographical locations that are only found within Mongolia. The auction house naturally got their lawyer to respond to the President of Mongolia's demands that the auction be cancelled. In a typical lawyer style, the response claims that the lawyers see no legal problem with selling a fossil the Mongolians claim was nicked, and then goes on to say, we are unaware of any Mongolian law that would have prevented export. Which I have to say, come on guys. And then to top it off, the lawyer goes on to try and make it look like their failure to make themselves aware of Mongolian law is somehow the Mongolians' fault, by adding, in the event that you fail to note a known prohibition preventing the auction, please advise. And they wonder why people hate lawyers. This letter is utter cheek. The President of Mongolia pushed for a restraining order in the American court system to prevent the auction going on, but failed on that count. Nevertheless, it seems that the auction house wants to hang on to at least a shred of its credibility, because although they sold this dinosaur fossil for $1 million, they've done so on the provision that the courts have to decide whether the sale was legitimate. And come on guys. So you basically said, yes, we admit that it's a bit dodgy and it might not be legal to sell it, but we've sold it anyway. You've basically admitted fault, but you've done it in a way that says, oh yes, we admit fault, but we don't admit fault. You can't have it both ways, guys. Words fail me on how arrogant and downright ignorant these people have been. If the fossil was uncovered in the last 50 years, it must have been smuggled out of Mongolia illegally. If the fossil was not uncovered within the last 50 years, it will have a paper trail determining its long line of owners, right back to its original export papers. If it has these papers, it can be sold at auction. If it doesn't, it should be returned to Mongolia for display in a Mongolian museum. The law is usually not all that black and white, but in this case it is. The fossil can only fall into one of these two categories, and right now I'm thinking it falls under, whoops, this one's nicked, best give it back. And that's all we've got time for today. As always, there are links in the information box below so you can follow up on all the stories I've talked about here. You've been watching Legal News here on the Knobmouse channel. If you enjoyed what you've seen here, don't forget to click the like button, share the video with friends, and subscribe to see more like this in the future. But in the end, I've been Kirk-Robinson, you've been watching the video, and I'll see you tomorrow.